Rajiv Gulati. He's currently the Director, India-China Strategy at Eli Lilly and Company. Quintessential pharma man, had his pharma degree and has been in the pharma industry. Started his career with a company called Ranbaxy, which is the largest, one of the leading pharma company in India. And joined the joint venture that Eli Lilly started in India. He was one of the first two managers of the joint venture. And since then he has steered the company from one employee to now over 500 employees, right? And just a few months back, he has been promoted and he's come back to Indianapolis as the director in charge of implementing strategy for these two big markets, India and China. Without much further ado, Rajiv.
Thank you, Charles. And I'm really very happy to be here, not only because I have an opportunity to speak and I have sort of captive audience here, I think. At least the audience will listen. But it was such a pleasure sitting there and listening. First, Dean Smith, though he was very brief, he did say that when you go into a country, you need a strategy. But it was a real pleasure listening to Steve there. I think, Steve, the kind of things you said that one must follow, one would succeed anywhere in the world. And I think whenever you go into India or China, one must remember that these are complex countries and extremely competitive. So it's not really easy, but with a well laid out strategy, there is good business to be done there. Now, Steve talked about how Cummins succeeded. So you got a perspective of an organization, of a company going into a country and doing business. I'm going to step back a little and I'm going to talk really at a macro level. I'm going to talk only about the country. And I'm going to talk about India. Charles mentioned that I have moved to Indianapolis a little while ago. Somebody asked me, when did you move to India? And I said, well, it's 6 weeks, and I think I still retain the right to talk about India because the speed at which things are changing, if I'm here 6 weeks longer, maybe I won't even know what's happening out there. I can really give you a couple examples. In last 6 weeks, two things which I found out by chance. In India, the infrastructure has been a problem, and you will see that as we go ahead with the slides. Telecommunication used to be a big challenge. You call from Delhi to Bombay, which is 1,000 miles, and you had to pay a lot of money. And now I find you need to pay 2 cents a minute to call on your cell phone anywhere in the country. You can call from anywhere to anywhere at 2 cents a minute. And that is bringing about its own revolution. So technology coupled with entrepreneurship which exists, the country is really changing at a fast pace. These are some of the facts, some of the things you would know, and the image you have about the country. India is still not one country. It's very diverse, and any which way you look at it, there are two countries. It's rich and it's poor. It's educated and it's uneducated. It's north and it is south. It is modern and it's ancient. But the key thing to remember is that everything coexists at the same time, at the same place. The biggest change which has happened in India started really in 1991, and Charles did mention in his opening comments that the country was almost broke. $100 million of foreign exchange reserves, not enough to pay even for 3 weeks of imports. And today the foreign exchange reserves are something like $150 billion US. And the GDP growth, which used to be about 2%, population growth 2%. From 1947 to 1991. GDP growth, 2% from 1947 to 1991. Per capita income, constant. So you can imagine that here was a country which seemed to have no future whatsoever. And you see what's happening now. There's hardly any inflation. Prices are in check. Population growth has fallen from 2%, now it's down to 1.7%. But GDP is growing, compounded annual growth rate you see on the screen at 6.5. But you look at last couple of years or you look at last few quarters, it's actually running at 8%. So it is not only continuing to grow, it's accelerating. And what does it really mean? And what is bringing this about? Well, what is bringing this about is technology. And I think most of us have read the Tom Friedman's book, The Word is Flat. When you connect the whole world with broadband, then you don't need the infrastructure. And that was what was keeping India behind. The problem with airports, with roads, with electricity. And suddenly you don't need that. Sitting in India, you can provide services. And that has bring about a significant change in the country. Of course, at the same time, India totally liberalized. And that's why we mentioned 1991, because before that, it was a centralized, planned economy where government would decide how much you should produce. 2 automobile manufacturers producing 25,000 cars each, that's it. You want a car, you wait for a year. 2 two-wheeler manufacturers, you want a two-wheeler, wait for 10 years. You want a telephone connection, wait for 10 years. Not so long ago, only 15 years ago. Today, there are more than 1 million cars produced in India, and the place where we have the Lilly office, in the same town, we have the largest two-wheeler manufacturer in the world. Produces 1.2 million motorcycles a year. That's one company, and there are several such. So freeing the economy, at the same time when this technology changed, things began to happen. Now there are 2 things which I'm going to share about India. One is that because of lots of educated people, and one thing which is different in India from China, that the medium of education in India is English. So anybody who's a graduate in India speaks English. Now you combine a large number of graduates and engineers and physicians with the fact they all speak English, and the fact they are connected to the whole world through broadband. So you have a situation where, unlike China, which focused on foreign direct investment, infrastructure, and the manufacturing as the engine of growth, you have India, which is depending upon services and consumption within the country, just like the US. 70% of the US economy is driven by the retail economy, the retail purchases, and India it's 66%. So it's different. So the 2 things which are happening there is, one, that India is really becoming the back office for most things, and one cannot even imagine the kinds of services which are migrating to India. I'll show some of those. And because of that, and because of the growing economy, because the business is growing, India is also becoming an important market for products, because it's a domestic purchase which is driving the economy also. So these are the 2 things which I'm really going to talk about. But the key thing here is that the pace of change is really significant and needs some adapting to, not only for a company going into India, but trust me, even for an Indian company operating in India, it needs to adapt very quickly. Such is the speed of changes there. I talked about India is becoming the service capital of the world. Reasons are not far to seek. 2.5 million college graduates, university graduates every year. But if I take engineering and science, it's 0.6 million engineering and science graduates in India, 0.5 million a year in China, and 0.4 million a year in the US. Just want to leave that thought with you. On the previous slide, I actually did not mention, but the point I was mentioning here is that unlike the aging economies of Europe and Japan, which is already aged, in India, in the foreseeable future, the population will remain, majority of the population will remain in the productive age group of 15 to 60. So productive age group, education, English language, and no wonder that India is emerging as the service capital of the world. And these were the issues which used to be in the past. Infrastructure, But if Charles did mention that Chinese economy is driven by manufacturing and they are looking to grow in services, fact remains that Indian economy is growing because of services, and India realizes that they have to focus on infrastructure and manufacturing. And that has begun to happen too. So if you go into India today, you would find, I mentioned about telecommunication, but you will see investment in roads, you will see investment in underground rails, the interest cost, which was a big hurdle for businesses. 10 years ago, you could borrow money at not less than 17 or 18%. You can borrow money today at 6 or 7%, which has brought about a significant change in businesses and the personal lives of the people. And this has happened in last 10 years. And if you talk about India as a destination for outsourcing services, which I mentioned is the scary part, because people are genuinely worried that if it begins to happen, then the jobs would move from one place to another. And it can happen in manufacturing, it can happen much more in services because the pace of change is much quicker. Finance and accounts, product development, human resource, technology, services, and there are examples after examples after examples. You talk to law firms, you find that the drafting is being done in India. You talk of your taxation, and you find that accountants in India are doing that for the taxation firms here. And you heard IBM employing 45,000 people in India. GE has tens of thousands of people. Microsoft has its second research outfit outside of the United States in India. You heard about Cummins, what they are doing in India. So that is a place where you can get services. You can outsource almost everything. In fact, we talk of intellectual property, and that's another issue one always keeps in mind about India and China. But there are companies, I believe it's been quoted in media, that the patent attorneys of Motorola convinced them that the patent application can be outsourced, and there's an Indian lawyer sitting there in India writing patents which are being filed all over the world for Motorola. And if we talk about medicine, and healthcare is one subject I'll go a little deeper into. Well, there are situations that you have US-trained physicians, US-trained radiologists sitting in India. When it's night here, everybody's sleeping, you're sending your CT scans, MRI reports, your x-rays, you're sending electronically to India, and by the time you get up in the morning, you have a radiologist certified in all the 50 states in the US, looking at them, signing the reports, and with a staff of 40 or 50 local radiologists, and sending the things back. And there is no profession which is immune to this. There is a value to be captured here for almost every function. These are some of the trends. If you look at captive outsourcing, companies doing their own, or you look at third party, the numbers are really significant. We are talking about anywhere from 25 or 30 or 30 plus percentage. Driven by sustainable cost advantages, opportunities to consolidate, and there are productivity pressures, I think, in all the industries in the world. And I know even in pharmaceuticals, the kinds of pressures there are, because the cost base is high and there are pressures on pricing going forward. So everybody realizes that we need to raise productivity. So this is a trend which is known and accepted. But what is it? This is one part I said I'll talk about. India as a destination for getting services done. The other is it's creating a market for products. And if you look at the market size, 2004, or we are in 2006 now, we are talking of more than 300 million people middle class. Well, that's the population of the United States. Of course, this is based on purchasing power parity. So in absolute terms, we are talking about an income which is roughly 1/3 the income of a family in the US. But even by those standards, as you can see, it's a very large market which is emerging there. And I said I'll talk about healthcare. Now, what happened in healthcare in the last 10 years is equally amazing, and I can tell you how it impacted our company a little bit. As the incomes have grown, You saw that inflation is in check and GDP is growing. As people start earning more and more, health becomes important. As hygiene improves, infections begin to fall. So India used to be a market for antibiotics, infectious diseases. It was only thing that was important was to save life, treat infection, be back on work, and that's it. But the things which are happening, four-stroke engines, lead-free gas, polluting industries relocated out of the cities, new modes of transport. I mentioned about electricity-run railways, and if you go to Delhi, you can really see a change in the quality of air you breathe in. And when I go to meetings like this, I take it a point to make it a point to point out that 10 years ago, nobody was doing it, but today at every meeting, everybody has a bottle of mineral water in hand. And no wonder that the gastrointestinal infections are falling too. So what is, if these are falling, then what is rising? Cardiovascular, diabetes, largest number of diabetics in the whole world are in India. Neuroscience, cancer. So suddenly you realize that the diseases in these countries have begun to mimic exactly the therapeutic areas of the diseases in the West. And suddenly your entire product portfolio that you are developing, your product pipeline that you are developing in the future becomes extremely relevant for these countries, which wasn't so 10 years ago. You had to wonder, if we get into these countries, what is it that we are going to talk about, and what is it that we are going to sell? There are some other nuances, which are the local nuances. For example, the healthcare spending is increasing as the country is growing, but India especially is an out-of-pocket country. And there's hardly any health insurance, and there's hardly any government spending. 85% of the market is patients paying out of their pocket. Now that has its challenges, but that has its advantages too. You don't really have to wait like many European countries to get onto the formulary. If your product has merit, and then there are people who are willing to pay for it. Other change which has happened is, because people are more health conscious, there is an emergence of corporate hospitals. Now these provide world-class healthcare. These are expensive by Indian standards, but a fraction of the cost by US standards. So this is leading to another industry called medical tourism. And some examples here, cardiac surgery, and the comparisons of the costs in the US and costs in India. And I have not one, but more than one personal anecdotal examples. And if you look at the second last row, root canal, $3,000 in the US and $100 to $200 in India. And I have examples of couples traveling to India, taking a vacation, getting dental work done, and coming back, all in the less than it would have costed them to do that in the US. So as I said, nothing is immune as far as outsourcing to India is concerned. But one thing we sometimes forget, that politics and business, they go hand in hand. And fortunately for India also, it's the economy which is now driving the politics. And you see, this is a study done by a Pew Center, and this is a global attitude survey that the people in the countries, what do they think about the US? And you find that after the US, it's the Indians who like US the most. It's more than Canada even. So these numbers are there. It wasn't so 10 years ago, I can tell you, but this is the reality today. So there's a very favorable impression out there, and they find it very easy to work with the US corporations. Now this is a joke which I pulled out of the internet, that President Bush is talking that, look, we are going broke and we must outsource National Aeronautical Space Association to India. But let's look at reality. It's not too different. India has announced its lunar mission. India is going to send a craft to moon. And on 9th of May 2006, well, less than a month ago, NASA and Indian Space Research Organization signed a memorandum of understanding where NASA is sending 2 equipment on this lunar mission. Of course, if you do things in India, the cost is a fraction, less than $100 million. Of course, in this case, US gets to send those things free. So in the end, what am I saying? What is it leading to? Fact is that if you are in the US and and you have a competency which is unique in the world, then there is a huge opportunity to do business in India. And I have some of the examples. I was talking to some of the scientists at Lilly and how the research scenario in India is changing. And they talked about infrastructure, and they talked about something simple as mass spectrometer. 3 years ago, there were 13 pieces in India. Today, there are 217. Each costs $500,000. So $100 million investment in one piece of equipment supplied from the US. You can check it from the vendor here, that who are the people who are buying in, and you know where the capabilities are. But I'm not talking about the capability here. I'm talking that if India is growing in something, then it needs technology to grow. And that creates an opportunity to do business. Software, computers made in the US. Penetration of PCs in home, it's all driven by Intel and AMD. As the business and GDP is growing, the domestic air travel is growing. Boeing has received the largest ever order from India, worth several $billion. A lot of Indian pharmaceutical companies are getting into discovery research. All of them know they don't have money to develop the compounds globally and to market them globally, and all of them are tying with the US corporations. It's so on and so on. And Charles did touch upon that if each country focuses on its core competency, its comparative cost advantage even in services, that leads to increase in the global economy. And Steve had done a great job giving suggestions, ideas to individual companies. All I'm saying is that the opportunities that exist, and we have examples of Cummins, of Lilly, Rolls-Royce, companies which operate out of India and are doing business with India, and TCS, which is based out of India and a huge business in Indiana. In fact, Lilly is one of the 10 largest clients for TCS in the world, and Cummins is, I think, also in top 10 or 15 clients in the world. So you see it cuts both ways. So there are opportunities in products, in development, in services, in sourcing of talent, and manufacturing, every which way. But the key to how to do it, we already know. We have heard Dean Smith and we have heard Steve Chapman. Thank you very much.